How's everybody doing today? We're just waiting for a couple people to join. It's 5:04. People are still just rolling in. Rashidah, Lisa, and I were just talking about the several deals that we have together, and all the different clients and where they are in their process. Some of them from this class and some of them, that we just worked with organically. And we have a question in the chat about for people just to share where they're joining us from. I'm just going to wait for people to join and then I'll do introductions. I'm not in my office today. I'm upstate, so excuse me for if you're going to hear my dogs barking when they hear a deer or somebody outside, they're going to make some noise, but I'll try to keep it on mute before that. Does anybody want to share? You can take yourself off mute and join and share where you're from, where you are in the buying process, or how you found out about this class. Oh, lost somebody. I was on mute. And I'm gonna see if anybody has any questions, Megan or this other account that doesn't have a name. Do you want to ask any questions before we get started? Okay, no questions. Okay, I think that we're gonna really move very quickly through our presentation and then save questions for the end. My name is Victoria Alexander. And I'm sorry, I was like looking at messages are coming in as I'm speaking. I'm Victoria Alexander. I am the owner of Realty Collective. We just celebrated our 15-year anniversary. We are a small boutique real estate company that tries to break the stereotypes and norms associated with being a real estate broker here in New York City. I've been doing this class for almost the 15 years since I started the company, but we used to do it in person. It's called Buying into Brooklyn. Rashidah and I did it. The most recent one 3 or 4 years ago, I think 3 years ago, probably, because we did one last year, but I think with John from your office. And we used to partner with Brooklyn based and we did them at the Brooklyn Brewery. Then when I first started doing them, I did them at the Brooklyn Brainery, which was like another class organization. And it's been a really great resource for me and for clients to, just talk always about the changing market and changing environment for buyers and sellers, because, people would say that we're in a seller's market, but right now we're in a buyer's market. So understanding what that means and why it benefits you is always really important. Going back to my notes that are now all the way at the top of the chat. And so I've been doing this class for first time. It's mostly focused on first-time home buyers, and I've been working with Lisa and Rashidah now for a while, helping first-time home buyers. I like working with an all-women team, and I think that is really changed the way that I think women feel about buying when they're working with other women. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. You want to go first, Lisa?
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name is Lisa. I'm from CrossCountry Mortgage. I am a mortgage loan officer. CrossCountry Mortgage is a private mortgage lending bank. So that means that we work like all of the big banks, but all we do is mortgages. I specialize in the New York and Brooklyn market, but I do loans everywhere from upstate New York to other places in the tri-state area to the West Coast. I also really enjoy working with first-time home buyers. It's a very exciting and, anxious time, and it's really exciting helping someone buy their first home. I also really love being a female loan officer because there's not a whole lot of them out there, and it's really fun to sort of add a woman's take on things, particularly to female buyers, which I think is much needed. Yeah, that's sort of me.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rashidah Siddiqui. I am a real estate attorney. I have been practicing roughly about 18 years, represent a lot of first-time buyers, pride myself on, hopefully making the process as smooth as possible, especially when you're, spending a lot of your hard-earned money and going into a new chapter in your next chapter. Worked with Victoria for, as I said, for quite some time now, and my office represents lots of buyers in the New York City and the New Jersey area, whether it's co-ops, condos, or houses. So I look forward to sharing some more knowledge. Thanks, everyone.
Great. So just for those of you just joining us, we're going to have a little short presentation, go through the process real quickly as an overview, and then answer questions at the end. But thank you for joining us, and we're just going to get started. Share screen. My desktop, share. Oh, I need to open the presentation. There we go. Can you guys see the presentation? Great, I'm doing it right. Technology. Okay, there we are. Lisa, Victoria, Rashidah, we're all there on the internet. Then, so the first thing I like to go over with people is why buy? Building equity, your rents are too high, investment, you plan on staying in New York City a long time. If you're going to be staying in New York for 5 years, this is a really amazing, great time to buy. Interest rates are really low, and why waste your money on rent? You will never see that money back again. You should be buying and investing in your future equity and building that future wealth. Rent versus buy matrix. I have a calculator provided by the New York Times that sort of calculates rent versus buying and what's right for you. If you are in a rent stabilized apartment, might not be the best time to be moving. You have a really secure situation. And if you plan on staying there a long time, then purchasing might not be the right option. So you've figured everything out. You've gone through the matrix. You've decided that buying is right for you. First thing you're going to do is assemble your team. That's assemble your team of professionals and experts that are going to coach you through this process. And what you need is an attorney, that's Rashidah, mortgage broker, that's Lisa, and me, a real estate broker. You need a buyer's broker. It's different. I think that people don't understand when you walk into a property and there's a real estate broker there, that person represents the seller and the best interests of the seller. I'm, as a buyer's broker, I advocate for you and coach you through the process to make sure that I'm supporting you and giving you the advice and information you need to make your decision. You also might need a contractor, an architect, inspector. And the other most important thing with your team, you're just going to need some lead time, because if your lease is up to date February 1st, you're not going to be able to move and buy something in 30 days like you can in the rental market. So it's really important. People ask, Lisa, I think that this is one of the questions we had today from a new buyer that I'm working with Anna about buying and what the difference is between working with a mortgage broker or a mortgage banker and the cost associated with it. Because she called me and I was like, no, you need to call Lisa. There's no real difference. And it's super important that you get this pre-qualified and not just use a calculator online, because they're going to tell you different things. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, totally. So that's a really good question. So people always ask me like, oh, so you're a mortgage broker? And I say, no, I'm a mortgage loan officer. And the difference is brokers really are sort of the middleman between the banks that have mortgage products and the products that they have are typically like, they don't go directly to the client. So they use a broker to give those products to the client versus a mortgage officer. In the big banks, they have their one product, right? So if you talk to a Chase mortgage loan officer, he's going to tell you about the Chase 30-year, 15-year, whatever products. What I sort of really like about my company and what we do is we both broker and we do in-house. So I really like that because it gives the diversity of having a whole bunch of products. So I can find the right one for you, whether it's, a conventional 20%, 30-year down, or if it looks different. But in terms of the fee, there's no fee difference typically between using a broker or using someone else. And there should never be a fee for like a consultation. The client that Victoria, she was nervous of just talking to me would cost her money, and that's never going to happen, and that shouldn't happen.
Thanks. And people always ask me, you know, do you need to call your lawyer? Do you have a lawyer at this part of the process? I always say it's good to start talking to people and interviewing. You're going to spend a lot of time with the three of us. So it's important that whatever mortgage broker, real estate broker, and attorney you picked, you like them, that you vetted them, and that you feel comfortable talking to them, and that you trust them, because we're going to be giving you a lot of advice, and I can't work and help people that don't want to listen to advice so that's like a really important part of the relationship, is have a really healthy communication. So feeling like you've talked to this person and you feel comfortable, and not just like pick a name because I said, oh, you should work with Rashidah, she was my lawyer, like I love her, or work with Lisa. You need to call everybody and feel like, okay, this is my person. They answered my questions. They make me feel knowledgeable. They make me feel empowered. I feel supported and educated. And that's the person you want on your side and be your advocate, because that's what our jobs are, is to advocate for you, to make the best decision for you. If I could work tirelessly for hours and hours and hours, if you decide not to buy because that's not the right decision for you right now, I hopefully helped you get to that place where you made a decision that was in your best interest. And I'm always going to be supportive of what is best for you. Not, if you didn't buy the house, okay, I didn't make any money, but at the end of the day, you have to live there, and you have to live with the consequences of your decision making. So our job is to get you there. So after you assemble your team and you've talked to Lisa about how much you can afford, and you've talked to Rashidah and you've decided this is the person for me, and they tell you how much you can afford, we start thinking about all of the finances that go into the process. And that is Lisa's expertise. So she's going to talk to you about how much down, closing costs, all that kind of stuff to consider when before we start looking at property out there on the market.
Yeah, so what's going to happen is when we reach out and we just start to have a conversation, okay, as to what you think you're looking for, how much do you think you could put down, what kind of property, is it a condo or a co-op, a single family or a multifamily? I think probably what people most don't understand about the mortgage process is it's actually really personal. It's really about sort of me figuring out what you want and then letting you know what that would look like in terms of a down payment, closing costs, housing payment. And then we can tweak it as we go. So in our first conversation, we really just sort of get an idea of your employment, of how much you make, et cetera, et cetera. And then I run your credit and give you a pre-approval. And that pre-approval is really, I always say, it's really a working draft. It's a fluid document. With that pre-approval, then you're going to start seeing things with Victoria or whoever realtor you're working with, and you're going to start getting a better idea of what you want. It's always really important to talk to a mortgage person early in the process, because you don't want to fall in love with something you can't afford, or think that you can afford less than you really can. So it's pretty important to start it early, just so that you have correct parameters as to sort of what you're looking for. In terms of products, there's things from conventional 20% down to an FHA, which is more like 3.5% down, to stuff in between where you can put 10% down or more or less. It really depends on what you want in terms of your purchase price and what type of property. What's really exciting right now, and it's been exciting for a while, is just like rates are ridiculously low. So that allows you to actually look at a purchase price higher than you might have looked at last year, simply because you can borrow more because the rate is so cheap. Also, excitingly, it was just announced that starting in January, they're increasing the loan limits. This means that a conventional loan is going to be closer to 550 than 510. High balance is going to be closer to 820 versus it was like 7 something before. So these are great because it just gives you more options in terms of products for the kind of properties you want. The last thing I'll just say in terms of COVID, COVID has really only affect 2 things, one good, one bad. The good news is with COVID, we actually have appraisal waivers now that we sometimes get on properties, or appraisals are done externally. This just sort of helps the process. So the appraiser traditionally would have to go into the house to see the property, and the appraisal is what the bank requires to confirm the value of the property. And then the other thing with COVID is just it's really affected self-employment. So that doesn't mean you can't get a loan if you're self-employed. It just means that I'm going to have a few more questions and a few more documents I'm going to need from you to qualify. If your business is closed right now, you're not going to be able to get a mortgage. If your business took a huge hit, you're not going to be able to get a mortgage if you're self-employed. You can, but we have to sort of plan for the future, or you have to get a co-borrower. And again, these are conversations that you'll have with me or another mortgage professional, depending on your specific scenario.
That's super exciting to hear that they changed the limit so now I can get a loan up to 550. Thanks, Lisa. Tidbit of the day. Okay, so you've had your conversation with Lisa and you've hopefully started interviewing lawyers and are talking to me and Rashidah. And so where do you search? You search anywhere online. Somebody in the last class was like, my real estate broker is not sending me listings that are outside that I can't find myself on StreetEasy. Their job is not really to send you listings. The internet has changed our jobs considerably, and it's much more focused on being coaches and being experts in the field, because just as a especially for first-time home buyers, you really need that person to help you through the process. So it isn't about, the internet has just changed everything. You can find everything on the internet. If you're looking for some off-market thing, I would say that they usually don't reach first-time home buyers to begin with. They are offered to developers and people that have all cash. Somebody asked me about foreclosures and I said, out of my field of expertise, you got to talk to somebody else. I'd not go into any auctions. But I know Rashidah, you deal sometimes with foreclosure things. So I think it just depends on what kind of buyer you are. And if you have $1 million in cash in the bank, then you can buy all the things at auction that you want. So I would say StreetEasy is a really great resource. Zillow. Is anybody looking at anywhere else? Trulia, Realtor.com. I think people ought to use that for New Jersey and upstate. Any new sites? I know Localize was getting big right before COVID. I'm not sure if people use that. If you want to put where you're searching, you put it online. So, but as a real estate agent, I do have access to the New York City MLS that clients do not have access to. So that means that all of the listings are populated in one space for me to look at, and I can send you listings from all of the different sources. It just is not a public website. So that's where you search. Then you try to figure out what you want. I spend a lot of time going through this normally in class, going about, in Williamsburg, it's new construction condos. In Brooklyn Heights, it's pre-war co-ops. Prospect Heights, same thing, but mixed with brownstone. So like depending on the neighborhood is what type of property is available there. If you want an elevator building, you're probably not going to be moving to Cobble Hill, Carroll Gardens. If you want a doorman, you're probably not moving to anywhere besides Brooklyn Heights. There's a handful of elevator buildings around Grand Army Plaza, but really because the building height's under 6 stories, most apartment buildings do not have elevators. Even new construction, I'm looking at a lot of new construction in Bushwick right now. A lot of them are walk-ups. So just depending on what you want, as you're like, I tell people to make like a list of 5 mandatory things that they have to have on their list. And then a couple weeks in, I said, okay, now take 3 things off of that list and you'll get 2 of them. Because really it's, you're going to have to make concessions. You're going to have to figure out what's really important to you. And right now, during COVID, a lot of people really need the amenities like outdoor space, washer, dryer in their apartment. They really need a dog. So they're making decisions based on their quality of life. And that's going to make their life, just easier and more enjoyable if they're staying here in New York City. And I hope you are. So you found the place, you've fallen in love. We are about to put in an offer and negotiate terms. We put in an offer and it doesn't get accepted because there's a crazy bidding war because you picked the apartment that everybody wants and they underpriced it on purpose to drive demand. So then we find something else and we put in an offer and we go back and forth and we accept some terms. Once terms are accepted, we then send out deal sheets, and deal sheets go to the lawyers. While the lawyers are reviewing the deal sheets and collecting due diligence, we usually do an inspection. Inspections now are mostly happening. In some cases, you can have them waived because of COVID, depending on the building. So Rashidah, I think the next slide just kind of talks about we have an accepted offer. What gets us from offer to contract signing?
So yeah, so we come in the third person on the wheel. Your offer's been accepted. I tell clients, you love the property. If you're looking at a co-op and condo, as your attorney, we have to do due diligence. So you love what you saw, but we want to make sure that you're buying into a financially sound building. So for co-ops and condos, it takes maybe a week, sometimes less or more, depending on the building. We have to review the offering plan, the financials, board meeting minutes, to make sure you know what you're buying into, because you want to know if there's like maintenance increases coming up, if there's litigation going on, if there's issues with the leaks in the building, because you're buying into a building with other unit owners when you're buying a co-op or a condo. For a house, one of the things you have to do prior to you signing is doing your inspection, because your contract has said that you understand the condition of the property, you're taking it in as is condition, you've either done your inspection or you waived it. So all of that happens, your offer's been accepted, you're spoken with your attorney, I'm getting the contract, I'm reviewing it and doing my due diligence during that period. Some of the things that I'm looking for in your contract is, do you have a financing contingency? Because if you're getting a mortgage, that's a big deal. How long? And typically that's 30 to 45 days to get your mortgage. What that means, if you been pre-approved, have you spoken to somebody like Lisa or another person to make sure that they understand you're about to enter into contract? Your contract has an amount that you're able to apply for, your maximum. So if you're putting down 10% and your contract says you're doing an 80% mortgage, you need to make sure with your attorney that your contract reflects that you're actually getting a 90% mortgage because you put it down 10%. So those are the things that I'm looking for when I'm reviewing the contract and before you sign. Also, if you're buying a co-op, one of the things is you have to get interviewed. So you want to make sure that, that time period is your closing date is probably going to be 60 to 90 days, because you have to get your mortgage, then you have to get interviewed, you have to get your approval. And all of those are steps that if something does not happen, you have a right to cancel the contract. So part of my review of the contract is making sure that you know all of your contingencies, and that your down payment is secure, or at least you know what the issues are. Basically, COVID-19, a couple of things that have come up in the last couple of months is mainly we've been trying to put in what we call as COVID-19 clause. It's really about extending your time periods, because those two things, like your mortgage and your closing date, there are finite dates in your contract. It may say on or about 60 days for closing, 45 days to get your mortgage. But if we're on lockdown or there's a situation, that time period has to get extended. Prior to that, you could potentially get your down payment at risk if you don't have that right to extend those time periods. So we try to put in a COVID-19, as I said, a clause in regard to extending your time period. That's really mainly it. We try to put in funding contingencies in regard to your mortgage, so that if the bank has to approve the condo or the co-op, that's part of it. So that even though you may get a preliminary commitment, you want to make sure that the appraisal is done, the condo is approved, the co-op is approved, because once you get that commitment, now you're in a firm contract, and we want to hopefully safeguard your down payment as much as possible. Closings right now are done. You're in contract. Your closings can, take between 60 to 90 days. I had a closing today. It was in person, but everyone was in separate rooms. I have a closing this week. The later part of this week, it's done partly remotely. So we're sending everything to the title company in advance, and then we have funding. I have another closing where I'm meeting my clients in advance for them to pre-sign documents, and then we're overnighting. So there's a lot of different things as a buyer that you need to be flexible with, making sure you have your down payment, Wires are being done, so you want to always double check when you're sending out funds. Speaking with your attorney, who are you sending your funds to, verbally confirming that information. Contracts are being signed electronically, so my clients are meeting with you via Zoom to make sure that you understand everything that you're signing before you go into contract. And then the actual closing is in person, or you can give your attorney power of attorney. But a lot of the banks still want you to sign documents in person.
So I think we have a couple questions. I think, there's some other details that we can go into, but I know we wanted to leave a lot of time for questions for people because we could talk about the final walkthrough and those sort of things with the closing. But I think the most important thing is to put your questions in the chat, or you can take yourself off mute and we can talk talk via the Zoom. But somebody asked how many of the listings I like online ask for a minimum 20% down. Is there a final or could it be negotiated? So some co-op buildings, especially nowadays, I would say if they say 20% down, there isn't usually room. A broker will put 10 or 15% down in their advertising because they want people to know that information. But a lot of co-ops specifically and new construction condos. So if you're purchasing in a new construction, so for the building to get the financing that it needs to start closing the rest of the deals, most of the first offers and deals need to have the full amounts. So that means that they're not going to take long. Lisa, do you want to talk about this? I don't know all the details, but I know that like for new construction, the first couple deals have to be the 20% down, and for co-op. So you could always ask via email, but I would say that if they could take less, a broker's going to advertise that they can take less.
Yeah, I think just adding to that, like in co-ops in general, if anyone, and I have had a few clients that have found a co-op that was less than 20% down. That is super rare. And before I would sort of issue the pre-approval, I would be like, I would talk to the realtor and to the client to make sure they've confirmed that they'll accept 20% down. And it's not just the financing, it's the co-op board. So, the last thing you want to do is plan on 10% down and get all the way to the co-op board interview. And the co-op board says, no way, we want 20% down or nothing. So, so that's sort of the issue with that.
Yeah. So I would say always asking, hopefully the listing broker knows that information ahead of time. But you should be working with a broker that's going to help you find the properties that can take 10 and 15% down. There are co-ops that do it.
And then also as part of for me, for part of the due diligence, I always ask, what's their mortgage amount that they require. So hopefully prior to you even signing the contract, if the realtor didn't tell you, hopefully your attorney as part of their due diligence, if you're looking at a co-op, they'll tell you that it's a 80% minimum for your mortgage, as part of
You're
that.
cutting out a little bit, Rashidah.
Yeah, sorry
There
about
you go.
that.
You got to lean in.
Yes. So yeah, I was saying that part of the due diligence, your attorney should hopefully also be checking regarding how much a building requires as part of your mortgage. Because that's also confirming part of that mortgage financing contingency that you have in your contract of sale.
Thanks. So somebody asked, do you think that the market will continue to get better for buyers? So the market's pretty great right now for buyers. Interest rates are really low. We're in the middle of the winter, so things are definitely in a slower point. So I feel that my buyers have had more negotiation room, but prices have pretty much held price per square foot in the neighborhoods that we're looking at. So I think that it just depends on what you're looking for and not taking too much of a risk waiting for things to get better, because what if things get worse, better for sellers? Like what if more people, because of the vaccine, start moving back to Brooklyn, and so it drives up demand? Like, try and work within the opportunity that is presented, because if you wait too long for the perfect time, that opportunity probably will pass you by. So try to take advantage of the scenario that we have that presented now. So it's hard to just tell what's happening in the future. Somebody told me, at the beginning of all this, that prices were going to come down 20-30%. And in Brooklyn, we haven't seen that. It would be great. I would be buying in Brooklyn too. I'm actually looking about buying a place in Manhattan because there has been more room in prices in Manhattan, sadly, because people really see the value of Brooklyn. It has a lot more amenities that I think that people want for their quality of life, that for COVID, than being in a high-rise midtown area or not close to the park. So for me, I think the real value, if you're looking for value and what's a real opportunity for buyers, is probably Manhattan. Brooklyn, the prices are just holding, and depending on the type of product. If you don't have outdoor space, if you're not a finished turnkey property, if you don't have access to washer dryer, like these are the things that people want right now. So if the properties don't have those things and they've been on the market a while, those are the places that probably need to be making some more serious price adjustments. But deals are happening. There's bidding wars happening. If you have something that everybody wants, outdoor space, 2 bathrooms, pet friendly, lots of amenities, that, people are going to fight over it because there's not a lot of really beautiful products like that that on the market. Brooklyn is just like a rarity, and because it's so much of the building stock is owned by landlords, like 1 to 4 families are just owned by, one person, and they own a lot of them. So it's just harder to find those things because there's just not as much inventory. But there's a lot of like new construction inventory, like in Bushwick right now, parts at East Bed-Stuy, maybe some Williamsburg. Cobble Hill Care Gardens, there's like not a ton of inventory over here. Red Hook, nothing. I mean, not that much. I've sold it all. It's closing this week. So was there other questions about the market or loans?
I will sort of say one thing, just going on the market and also what Rashidah was mentioning. One thing you do have to be cognizant of is just the volume that's going on right now in terms of deadlines. Pretty much everyone in the world is asking for a mortgage. Either they're looking to buy or they're looking to refinance because rates are so low. So that means that appraisals are taking longer. Underwriting's taking longer. Everything's taking a little bit longer. I'm really, really proud of my team because we've actually stayed really awesome on our underwriting and getting things through in, 10 days of an underwriting queue, which is sort of unheard of. But like the big banks are taking weeks before an underwriter looks at your deal. So you need to be cognizant of that when you are working with Rashidah, working with an attorney, setting up a contract that if you're going with a big bank, you need to make sure that you're protected for your closing date and your commitment date because it's just taking longer. If you have a contract that you want to close in 45 days, or personally you want to close in 45 days, you need to have a very serious conversation with your mortgage officer, so that they can give you realistic expectations on if that's possible and how to make that possible. So for example, the conversation I have with my borrowers is like, okay, you want to do that? Then this is what we need to do to get that done. And then it's able to happen.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that as well. I have a situation with a client that we're going into contract and they want to close January 15th and they are stuck on that date. And I'm like, well, the title can take 2 weeks. I can put it on a rush, but is your bank going to be able to get you a mortgage, get you cleared, deal with the trade rules, and get a closing in with holidays? And I'm like, you have to have a serious conversation with your loan officer and understand that what they tell you now may change along the way. So it's something that I personally, when I'm going over a contract with my clients, I make sure that you understand those time periods, especially if you also you're buying, so you may have to move out of your apartment. You have to deal with, moving situations as well. You have a lease that's about to end. So you want to be mindful that the dates are fluctuating. It's not like other states where you have an on or before date and that date is a set date. In New York, it's an on or about date for most of the closings. And you have a 30-day or so grace period and sometimes longer.
Someone asked me again this week about what will happen if they shut down again and you can't move, but for the move out date, because we have a February fund. It's like a rental, but the question was valid question. But even during March, April, and May, at the height of everything, the real no moving restrictions came from co-ops where they weren't letting people move in and out of the building. And I don't think that there was any restrictions. The state, like if movers were open, people were actually moving. I think during this time, closings were still happening. They were just happening virtually, right, Rashidah?
I was closing throughout the entire process. It was more about, as I said, about just flexibility, whether it's meeting with clients and between the doors, having them sign notaries and giving us power of attorneys, and then overnight in documents, we had shuttle closings. So, God forbid that we do go into a situation again where we have to go into some sort of lockdown. For the real estate market, we've learned how to get these closings happen. And one of the things mainly was the co-ops that had instituted the moving policies, but I think even them now, they've kind of figured out how to work around it and making sure that it is possible to still have move-ins and move-outs if they're doing closings.
So I think that are there any more questions? So let me just check the chat real quick.
There's one more
wait.
about loans. So someone wanted to know the best type of loans for those who do not have a large lump saved for down payment and closing and would like to purchase a multifamily. So if you want to do a multifamily and you want to, keep your down payment as low as possible, FHA is going to be a very good option for you. There are loan limits to FHA. You can also do something where you do something like 10% down. It really is sort of going back to that personal thing where you need to have a conversation with someone, because it sort of depends on the purchase price and are we using rental income to qualify from the other units? What kind of condition is the property in? So there's definitely options that are not 20%. With a purchase, you're going to have to pay the closing costs. You can't, like in a refinance, you can roll the closing cost into a loan. In a purchase, you have to pay the closing cost out of pocket, but those adjust based on, for example, if the property is over $1 million, you got a mansion tax and some other closing costs that make it higher. So what I always do when I'm talking to my borrowers is I give them a closing cost worksheet. I know Rashidah does as well. So that'll give you an idea of what you're looking at so that you make sure you have, the funds you need for the kind of place you're putting an offer on.
So piggyback on that, Lisa, have you seller's concessions? So that's a way of certain, and that's a little bit more, we can have a longer discussion on that, but it is a way to kind of like build in your closing costs in your mortgage. It's kind of like you have to increase the purchase price so that your mortgage can be increased. But once again, it's a conversation that you need to have with your attorney, with the realtor, because the property has to appraise for that higher amount. And then you're understanding that you're not actually getting a credit from the seller. You're actually just kind of financing your closing costs into your mortgage as part of the purchase. And that's
a great point.
Concession. And I definitely have conversations with clients when they're thinking about that as well.
I have a deal right now in Brooklyn, a multifamily, a 2-unit that he's buying using, and he has a seller's concession to basically, actually that exact example, he's doing FHA, it's a 2-unit, he's getting a seller's concession that he's using to apply to most of his closing costs. So it's definitely possible.
We have a couple questions. One was, what are the best type of loans for people who don't have a large lump sum to save for down payment? And the second part of that is, if I have student loan, will it be difficult for me to get a loan?
So student loans, that's something that we run your credit to see, and it really is necessary for the discussion because it depends on if your student loans, what the payments are. If they're deferred, we typically have to take 1% of what's reported as the loan amount or 0.5%, depending on what kind of loan product. So it's 100%, you're 100% able to get a loan if you have student loans. I think the question is, A, are you paying them? Because that's going to affect your credit report if you're not paying them, your credit score. And then 2, how much student loans are we talking about? So, it's definitely possible, but it's something that you need to have a mortgage professional run your credit and then have a conversation with you.
That's a good question. Lisa, do you know if this, because the last 9 months, everybody got their student loans deferred by the federal government. So I haven't been paying mine either because there's no interest accruing on the deferment. Mm-hmm. That's not going to negatively affect anything.
No, I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it affect it because it's going in deferred status. I haven't seen any examples of it affecting credit.
Okay, that's great. Because I was just like, I took advantage of that because who didn't want to pay for those last 9 months of student loans?
Now, just so you know, for anyone who owns properties here, the mortgage one that was around for a while, that definitely affected your credit. And so for people who took advantage of that, then basically there was a very complicated situation you had to get to before you could close whatever refinance you were doing, because these people were being told that it wasn't going to affect their credit, and it did. So if you have a mortgage, pay your mortgage, even if someone's calling you, offering you the option not to because of COVID, if you want to refinance or buy a property anytime soon.
Yeah. A lot of people are calling though. I've been getting like my social security scam. I've been getting all these crazy calls lately. So don't give any of your information to anybody that you don't know. Anyway, was that the last of the questions? I think that somebody asked about, putting the down payment, and like we had said, that's the FHA loan that you're hopefully going to be able to also wrap in some closing costs. But I think that we talked about every question you wanted. If anybody just has any last questions, I want to open it up before we end the class. And I want to thank everybody. What about the wave of foreclosures that was predicted? So, I mean, for me, like the governor just extended the tax lien sale again. Like they're making a lot of rules and exceptions to protect homeowners and people. Even after 2009, they changed a lot of the rules so that you can, some processes with foreclosures, that's why I stay away from them. People have up to 2 years to kind of get their property back. So in New York, so I think that I don't know if there's going to be a wave of foreclosures. Have you guys seen anything? Like I'm looking at the Real Deal and other things. I haven't seen any articles about those predictions.
Yeah, I haven't really seen a lot of clients buying foreclosure properties. I mean, there's properties that were already owned by the bank that probably those are sometimes they receive what's called real estate owned REO properties. But as far as foreclosures, I think because of there's so many ways that people can try to prevent their property from getting to that actual foreclosure sale, there hasn't been like a real wave of foreclosures.
Yeah. I had someone call me today and say that their property, they haven't been paying things, that they're a couple years, their mother passed and then the property went into estate and didn't handle it. And I referred them to an estate lawyer and was like, here, like, hopefully they can help you navigate the situation because I can't sell your property for you. Not in the.
Yeah, in New York, it takes it's a very long process to actually get to that foreclosure as well. So if you have like, if you're a developer or something and you're looking at foreclosures, it's a very, it's a process that is not for I wouldn't suggest first-time buyers unless you're very familiar and
savvy, very savvy.
Do the research on the property because there's a lot of different things. You're taking it as is, whether there's tenants in there.
And if there's tax liens or other liens,
yeah, so
and you typically have to get a hard money loan in those situations, because which basically means you're going to get they're going to give you, it's going to be a really fast process, but you're going to pay a ridiculous interest rate, and a portion of it's going to be due in 12 months, or you're going to have to refinance again. It's basically an emergency situation of getting money, but you're talking about a very, very high interest rate. And it's really the only way to get a property like that in situations where you're getting it as is. Like, how's the appraisal going to happen? How are various things going to happen that are typically required for a transaction? Yeah. Yep, exactly.
So I think, Monica, you asked too about bank-owned properties, and it's the same thing. Like, you're also realize, if I'm assuming because you're on this call, probably a first-time home buyer, bank-owned properties, foreclosure stuff, you're going to be competing against developers. Developers still have money right now, hopefully the majority, I would say, and they're all cash buyers. They're buying property without having to have a bank involved, without having to go through the same loopholes that first-time home buyers have to go through. So you're probably, that is like until you're an experienced buyer, I would say that's a field you want to steer clear of.
Well, also just wanted to touch on the bank-owned properties. I think it's actually a little bit better than the foreclosures, and probably better, easier for a first-time buyer, because you are taking it as is, but the tenants are potentially out. The bank has actually already secured the property. It's about finding that bank-owned property that it's there as well. But I've seen clients that have, put in like 10% still able to get bank-owned properties. The main thing with them in the contract is that you are taking it in as is. So they're not going to do repairs. They're not going to, you probably may have to get like a 203K renovation loan to do something if it's a property that is owned by the bank and you need to fix it up.
Yeah, just on the bank-owned properties thing, if you go that route, it is easier to get regular financing rather than like a foreclosure, but it's a much longer process because typically basically you go through everything and then you're just in a holding pattern for like potentially months, and then the bank says, okay, we're ready, this needs to close this month. So if you go that route, you just need to make sure that you and the mortgage professional you're working with are on the same page and have a plan. I have a recent client that came to me with the short sale, like bank-owned property situation that was been in contract for months, and now the bank has said we're ready to go, and the mortgage officer didn't do anything with the file. And so now they're in a position where it's like they need to close in 30 days or they lose their down payment, and their mortgage officer did nothing. So that's just a little trick that if you go that route, as you assemble your team, just make sure everyone's on the same page. I think that's about it.
Any other questions before we close out? And what a great group of people today and great questions. I really love talking to everybody and hearing from your perspective. And I recognize some names on here for people that I've met in the past. So thanks for joining. And I'm going to be following up with everybody in the next week. So thanks. I don't know how anything else to say. You guys.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks. Bye guys. Have a good night. Stay warm.
Everyone. Good night.
Bye.